The air over Warsaw tasted like pulverized masonry and high-octane disappointment. The opening days of the invasion had gone precisely as anticipated by anyone who had not invested in cavalry sabers. German armored spearheads had shredded the frontier defenses faster than a damp newspaper. General Staff's ingenious Plan West, delaying the enemy until Britain and France launched a crushing counteroffensive. The plan had been predicated on the assumption that Britain and France actually cared enough to get out of bed. They had not. And so, as the sound of distant artillery became the city's grim morning chorus, the High Command acted. Marshal Ridd Smigli, bless his fleeing heart, issued orders for a general retreat toward the Romanian bridgehead. This was merely a euphemism for the leadership executing a high-speed sprint towards a country that remembered them. With the generals now safely preoccupied with determining which brand of cognac was available in Bucharest, Warsaw was left to its own devices. Fortunately, Warsaw had devices and civilians who were profoundly annoyed. The city defenses were coordinated by men like Major Jerzy Wisniewski, a structural engineer by trade. He now found himself squinting through binoculars and smelling faintly of sawdust and nitroglycerine. He oversaw the frantic transformation of Warsaw into a fortress, thanks to the tireless labor of civilian volunteers. They had dug ditches, hauled stones, and erected improvised barricades, all while dodging Stuka dive bombers. The Stuka dive bombers seemed to view the city as a delightfully challenging skeet shooting range. Report, Janek. What did we lose this morning? Major Wisniewski yelled over the rumble of distant motors. Janek, a wiry corporal whose face was permanently smudged with soot, slammed a clipboard down on a sandbag. The distillery on Puławska Street, sir, and 3 blocks of apartments on Grochów were lost. The good news is the civilians managed to recover most of the essential plumbing before the panzers flattened the walls. Plumbing, Wisniewski sighed, rubbing his temples. Excellent. We will need that when we are starving. And the Western approaches. They are coming back, Major. They did not like being pushed out yesterday. That new battalion, the 10th Panzer Division, is not happy. I count 80-plus tanks and significantly more reinforcements. The initial German probing attack on the 8th of September had been an embarrassing failure for the Wehrmacht. While the panzers had easily overrun the outer suburbs, they had crashed headlong into the labyrinth of ditches. They crashed into the labyrinth of anti-tank ditches and improvised yet surprisingly sturdy street barricades. The defenders were bolstered by the survivors of the shattered field armies, who had limped back into the city. They used every conventional anti-tank weapon they possessed, which was roughly 5% of the necessary amount. But the Poles had repelled them. A victory that felt less like strategy and more like pure spiteful physics. The attack on the 9th, however, was clearly not a probe, but rather it was a sledgehammer. All right, Janek, Wisniewski said, peering through the scope. We have 3 7TP tanks left and enough ammo. We have enough 37mm ammo for maybe 20 minutes of sustained fighting. After that, we revert to Plan B. Janek shuddered. Plan B being the Molotov cocktails and sheer vocal hostility. No. Corporal Major Wisniewski corrected him grimly. Plan C is the flammable bedding. The sight that met the German tank crews as they approached the Wola district must have been utterly bewildering. They were expecting a desperate defense, perhaps suicidal charges, or even the dreaded Polish cavalry. They were not expecting the streets to be slicked with what appeared to be industrial solvent. The street leading directly to a crucial intersection looked innocent enough, albeit suspiciously wet. As the lead Panzer IV rumbled forward, a tiny, determined figure darted out from behind a pile of rubble. She rolled what looked like a small, leaky barrel onto the road. This was Sophia Kowalska, a retired kindergarten teacher. She was now the district's self-appointed chief morale and incendiary officer, convinced that war could be won. She believed people should apply enough zeal and highly flammable liquid to the problem. "Light it!" she shrieked, instantly regretting her choice of a brightly patterned apron for battlefield attire. A Polish reservist, armed only with a stick and a cigarette lighter, obliged the request. The flame turned their rubber treads into smoking, useless goo, and the panzers stalled their crews, yelling. Now and then the true ingenuity of the Warsaw defense was revealed. From dozens of windows and balconies, from lining the narrow street, an aerial bombardment of burning textiles began immediately. "Ach du lieber Himmel! Is that a mattress?" sputtered Lieutenant Klaus Richter, peering out of the cupola. Indeed, it was not just any mattress, but a thick, horsehair stuffed mattress generously doused in kerosene. Klaus watched in horrified disbelief as the Polish civilians perfected their technique. They hurled old comforters, threadbare rugs, and in one notable instance, a flaming upholstered armchair. The goal was not kinetic damage. It was psychological warfare by sheer, suffocating, flammable volume. When a burning feather-filled duvet settled over the air intakes of a tank, the engine sputtered violently. Starving the diesel of oxygen, and the crew quickly bailed out. They were met by a less than warm welcome from the now triumphant Polish infantry. Janek watched the carnage from his post, mouth slightly agape. "Major, they are literally fighting tanks with bedding." Wisniewski, trying hard to maintain his military bearing while admiring the improvised arson, nodded stiffly. "A bold move, Corporal. High risk of collateral damage to one's own possessions, but effective." Note for the records. Civilian ingenuity suggests that high-quality feather pillows make excellent anti-air defense. The second wave of the attack disintegrated into a smoking, bewildered mess as tanks were bogged down. Some crews were suffocated by the heavy, oily smoke from cheap linens, and others paralyzed by the sheer terror. They were fighting an enemy that seemed willing to sacrifice every piece of household insulation to win. By nightfall, the Poles could count 80 German tanks destroyed or immobilized, a significant fraction. Warsaw had survived day 2 of the siege. They were starving, and the city smelled of burnt fabric. Meanwhile, far to the east, the collapse of Poland was progressing according to the historical timeline. The news from the Western Front had delivered the final crushing blow to Plan West on September 13th. Polish diplomats had watched in bewildered horror as reports confirmed the unbelievable. France, after launching a brief, timid offensive into the Saar region on September 7th, had suddenly halted. Days later, having captured 20 useless German villages and achieving zero strategic effect, they retreated. They retreated to the perceived safety of the Maginot Line, the famous fortress network. The message to Poland was stark. "You are on your own, old friend. We have a trench to sit in." This profound disappointment was immediately overshadowed by the events transpiring further south in Lwów. Lwów had endured a grueling week-long siege by German forces, and the garrison was reduced to rationing. Colonel Miroslav Zalewski had been reduced to rationing water and praying for a miracle, or ammunition. Colonel reported Captain Leszek Krawczyk wiping a layer of grime from his glasses. The Germans are pulling back. They are not executing a tactical repositioning either. They are running away quickly. Miroslav hunched over a map stained with coffee and blood, frowned running. Why did the French find their spine? No, sir. It is coming from the east. Reports are vague but reliable. Russian armor. The Red Army. A silence descended upon the cramped command bunker as the men stared at each other, processing the information. The Soviets, Miroslav whispered. "Yes, sir. Pushing west. They are not fighting the Germans. They are simply occupying the space the Germans just evacuated in the chaos of 1939. Historical loyalties and diplomatic nightmares blurred into a hopeful fever dream. Poland had signed a non-aggression pact with the USSR in 1932, and Britain and France had been useless. Could the Soviets, seeing the historical opportunity, be sweeping in to flank the Wehrmacht? Miroslav rose his eyes, alight with manic, desperate hope. The pressure is off. They are the relief force. The Allies have finally moved, albeit the unexpected ones. Captain Kravchuk hesitated. Intentions be damned. They are pushing the Germans back. We have endured a grueling siege. We are out of food, out of shells, and our morale is held together by stubbornness and cheap vodka. If the Red Army is here to help us, we will accept the help. And so, on the afternoon of September 19th, the tired, proud defenders of Lwów opened their gates. Polish citizens, weeping with relief, lined the streets. The Soviet forces that rolled into Lwów were not the dashing, triumphant liberators of propaganda posters. They were methodical, heavily armed, and distinctly unsmiling, and did not seem interested in hugging. They were, in fact, suspiciously interested in the contents of the city's municipal buildings. Colonel Miroslav approached the leading Soviet commander, a grim-faced major who introduced himself. Major Krylov, welcome. We are so relieved to see you. We are at your disposal, and we're close to collapse. Krylov raised a hand, interrupting the flow of Polish gratitude. He spoke in a flat, bureaucratic tone. There is no coordination, Colonel. The defense has concluded you are now under the protection of the Soviets. Miroslav blinked protection. But we are fighting the Germans. The Polish government has collapsed. We are merely stabilizing the situation in western Ukraine. And Belorussia, we have arrived to collect spoils. The horrible truth sank into Miroslav's gut like a block of lead. The Soviets were not the cavalry. They were not the relief column. They were simply the second, even more terrifying wolf. They had arrived just as the first one finished gnawing off the leg. Krylov leaned closer, his eyes cold. Now, Colonel, we require an inventory of all valuable state property, especially any historical silverware. Also, where is your commander's residence? We need to ascertain which furniture is salvageable. The people of Lwów, who had cheered their liberation moments earlier, stood frozen, their relief curdling. They had not opened their gates to salvation. They had opened them to a meticulously efficient annexing party. The Soviets were not here to help them fight the Third Reich. They were here to make sure they got silverware. Back in Warsaw, Major Wisniewski was trying to absorb the increasingly surreal news arriving from the east. The city was still holding, repelling continuous German assaults, relying now on sheer flammable creativity. Yannick, leaning against a pile of spent shell casings, pointed a trembling finger at a fresh dispatch. Lwów surrendered major to the Soviets. They just marched in. Wisniewski pinched the bridge of his nose. So to summarize, the French went on a brief, pointless hike and then went home. Our high command is sampling wine, and our allies to the east have decided that this is an excellent time to participate in the division. They are possibly acquiring some nice new tablecloths in the process. It is worse than that, Major. We are now officially fighting two world-class military powers simultaneously, with no hope of support. Wisniewski looked out over the smoldering cityscape. The sheer injustice of the situation was too much. Right, well then, Wisniewski declared, snapping back into focus. If we have to fight two empires, we need more. He turned to a runner, fine Sophia Kowalska. Tell her we are initiating a citywide inventory. I want everything that is not bolted down, filled with feathers, or doused in turpentine. Pre-staged. If they send tanks, we will burn them. If they send infantry, we will drop burning pianos on them. Janek stared. Pianos. Major, we have run out of bedding. Corporal, necessity is the mother of ordnance. Warsaw was completely encircled. The siege tightened daily, and the German artillery continued its pounding. They were alone, facing the most advanced military machine in history, while the savior looted museums. The garrison was doomed, but they were not broken. Not yet. What about the Soviets? Major Janik asked. What is our strategy for fighting the Red Army once they finish cataloging the historic cutlery? Major Vishnevsky adjusted his battered helmet, a grim smile touching his lips. For the Soviets, Corporal, we innovate. We find out what their favorite flammable bedding is, and we stockpile it. Because if we are going to lose, we will make absolutely certain that the fall of Warsaw is expensive. It will be the most embarrassing and most flammable siege in the history of warfare. The fight was far from over, but the city was already starting to run out of things to burn. The clock was ticking, and the defenders of Warsaw needed a new secret weapon, and fast. Something they could hurl from a high window that would confuse and irritate the Soviets.